Hey there, Jason with Threefold Solutions again. Today we're going to talk about Planning Center people lists. Now, lists is one of my favorite topics. Lists are powerful, and lists are the way that we find people inside of Planning Center in our database. So I'm going to run you through lists, give you a quick overview, and then we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive into lists, and we're going to see some of the criteria that you can utilize. But I will just say right off the bat, I could spend 3 hours talking about Planning Center lists. There are so many facets to the combinations of things that you can utilize using lists. So the first thing that I always say is you're going to have to use lists to get good at lists. And the best way to start to learn all of the possibilities is to just be curious with lists and continue to drill down and dig into lists and find data. And the more opportunities you have to segment, filter, and find people, the more opportunities you'll have to learn these things. So I'm going to start off with a quick overview. So right now, looking at the homepage of lists, we're basically seeing a couple buttons up here. One is campuses, and the next is all categories. And right here, we have an opportunity to start filtering some of the information that we have in our lists. If you have multiple campuses, I highly recommend that you utilize categories and campuses to basically tag your lists. So in this particular list that we have over here, just to show that, we're going to come back to this and look at this a little bit more in the settings tab. But when we have a campus, we should always set that. And if this applies to everything, the whole database, then leave it as no campus. But when there's a category that's relevant, apply the category. And the reason is when you're looking at hundreds of lists over time, you want to quickly drill down into that category and see that list or lists that have that little label on them that match this category that you've set. And I would highly recommend thinking through categories so that when you create those categories, everybody abides by them and they use those categories as well. So keep that in mind. Everybody should speak the same language, should have the same idea when it comes to these categories. So this is probably something for those managers and admins to consider. Always set up these categories for future use. So that's how we filter and find things quickly. We also have some additional filter options such as recently viewed. Now, I will just point this out. If you were working on a list yesterday and you were really trying to figure out who this group of people was and you really spent some time on it and you wanted to jump back into it, but you can't remember what it was named, click on recently viewed and it will take you right back to those lists you were most recently working on. Then we have starred lists. Starred lists is a quick, easy way for us to add a star to a list and make it a shortcut. So we can jump right into this list, starred list area and see those primary or highly used lists that we return to all the time. So keep that in mind as well. Then we have my lists and all lists. My lists are the lists that I've created. They're the lists that I see because I created them. All lists are the lists that are available to me because others have either shared with me as part of a group or they've shared with me individually, but that's where I'm going to find those lists that somebody else created and it's part of all lists in the system. But my lists are only the lists that I've created. Now there's one other thing here and it's called unassigned lists. And you may be wondering what that's all about. So I'm just going to mention it. This is actually a recent addition, but what this actually does is it allows admins and managers who have permissions to see lists that may have been created and then abandoned. And what I mean by abandoned is when somebody has permissions to create lists inside a planning center and maybe they've decided to move on, they're no longer on staff or we've closed their account, we've inactivated it and they're no longer able to log in, those lists become abandoned. And when they're abandoned, nobody owns them. They go into this unassigned lists area. And that allows us to then go in there, pick those up, assign them to ourselves, and take that over. And sometimes those lists can have automations assigned to them where they're actually doing something in the background. So also a good kind of school of thought is to always make sure that when we set up automations, it's done by an admin or a manager and it's shared with somebody else. Always good practice. So there's not just a single point of failure there where if somebody's no longer logging in, that list is just running, without anybody attached to it. But this is where unassigned lists now come in. So let's get into the actual lists themselves. So over here on the right, we've got some lists. Now, in this particular list, I've got something called age between 0 and 17 years. It's a very basic list, but let's take a look at it. So in this list, we have some information. It's the results. But the first thing we want to look at are the rules. And the rules are where we can set different criteria to find different segments of people and filter those people. Now, there are a couple of things I want to point out about this list right off the bat. You're going to see some buttons up here for duplicate and delete rule. Now, if we're looking at this criteria and we would like to create something very similar to this as a secondary condition, we can click add condition and we can start from scratch and come up with some new criteria. Or we can click on the trash can and delete that, or we can duplicate this rule and we can see the exact same information that we had here in a secondary rule. And now we're actually utilizing the same information, but we're just going to tweak it a little bit. So maybe we want to look at something just slightly similar, but maybe slightly different, and we don't want to go through setting all these things again. I point that out early so that we can look at a couple examples and utilize the duplicate function to make things go a little bit quicker for us. So that's just a quick little tip that we're going to use from time to time throughout creating some of these lists. Now, before we get too heavy into that, I want to talk about these tabs across the top real quick, and then we're going to get into creating some list criteria, rules, and conditions. So we talked about results. This is where we see all of the people that we have found using our list rules, and they're listed here. Now, on this page, you have some options, and we're going to talk more about these options in just a moment. So we'll come back to that. Next, we have the rules, and that's where we basically set up what we're looking for, the criteria, the filters, etc. Next, we have automations. Now, automations are pretty powerful. Automations, let's go ahead and click on Create Automation, are a set of app-specific functions or actions that we can take when somebody is added to this list or when somebody is removed from this list. We can have one or each. So you could set up two different automations. Maybe once somebody's added to this list, we take an action, and then we set up another one. When somebody's removed from this list, we take another action. So keep that in mind. We can do both. We also have a list of apps that we have permissions to. These apps have functions and actions within them that we can take as an automatic action. So when I click on check-ins, I see that, I could check someone into an event, for example, or I could create and send a mobile pass. There are all kinds of different combinations. People has the most. So inside of people, you're going to see that I can set membership type. I can add somebody to a workflow directly or automatically from a list. I can set the school. I can set their grade. I can set all different kinds of criteria, as well as update custom fields in those custom tab areas just by clicking on it and saying, I found this information and these people have attended a particular class. So I'm going to update maybe a value on their profile in that custom field area. And in this case, maybe instead of attendee type, maybe we're actually going to change it to a date such as when they attended a growth track event or growth path event. And we could update the start date and we could say, maybe on the date that this automation runs. So there's ways for us to look at certain things and create criteria that says automatically do this and do it every night when this list runs. So keep that in mind. That's what automations are. They're very powerful. If you have access to a different set of apps here, you may not see all of them, but whatever you have access to through your permissions, you can see additional things. One actually I love is in services, we have the ability to add somebody to a team. So sometimes when we're dealing with new interested folks who are filling out a form to serve, maybe that's a really great automation where we can add them to a team on a certain step. So just keep that in mind. All kinds of different things we can do with automation. Next, we have the settings, and let's talk a little bit about that. We have this word collaborators, and this is not the first time we've seen that. We're going to see that all over the place, but basically collaborators are the people we give permissions to participate in our list, our workflow, our private area that we're providing permissions to. And we can add people as collaborators through groups, based on their group of permissions, such as all viewers can see this, or all editors can see this, or all managers can see this. And then we can just share it with specific people. So we could just add, good old Luke Skywalker here and just say, Luke, I'm sharing this with you, and I can give him view only or manage permissions. If I give him manage permissions, that means I'm sharing with him so he can change this. He can update it. He can run the list however he wants to. We're working together on trying to filter a group of people. So in that case, just expect Luke to change some things. If you only want Luke to view the results, just give him view only. And again, if you want this to be available, and let's say this is maybe a data maintenance type of list that we're running, and it's going to run every day or every night. Maybe we want to make that available to all managers, and we want to give them manage access, just like we talked about early on. If this is something that has an automation on it, we should probably always give all managers access to it, or at least a specific person who might be an org admin or something along those lines, so that they know we've created this and they have access to it. So just a good rule of thumb. Okay, if we need to remove anybody from our permissions or collaborators, we can just click on the little red X next to their name and it removes them. Now over on the right, we have those filter settings again. If this is specific to a campus, choose your campus. And if it's got a category with whatever you're doing, always add that category and make sure that it's specific to what you're actually working on or filtering out in your list. Now, auto refresh results means once we click this button, this list is going to run every night, specifically at 2 a.m. But every night this list is going to run, and it's going to look for new people in our database that meet whatever this criteria is. Now, the other thing you see on this page is the MailChimp status. Now, one thing you need to remember, and we're going to come back to this in a minute, is inside of Planning Center lists, if you plan to pull a list of people that you want to communicate with, if that list is greater than 500, Planning Center will not send it. It will default you to use MailChimp. So there is a limit to how many people you can automatically send to through the built-in email and communications options with lists, and that total number is 500. So anything greater than 500 inside a Planning Center list needs to use MailChimp or needs to have the data exported as a CSV file and sent through a third-party email system. Some people use all different kinds of things, from Constant Contact to all kinds of other third-party scenarios. But Planning Center has partnered with MailChimp and created an integration with MailChimp so that it's baked into your lists. And the way that this works is any list that you create and want to sync with MailChimp, you have to have MailChimp turned on. The integration has to be turned on. And when you sync with it, it will create an audience in MailChimp, and then the name of your list, whatever you decide to name it, will become a tag or a label over inside of MailChimp so that you can keep that straight. So that's just a basic way of talking about MailChimp. We can get into MailChimp in a later video, but this is specific to lists, and we're just going to stick to lists for now. So those are your settings. Now, if we return back to the results, I did say there are a few things that we can look at here quickly, and that's these buttons across the top. Now, first off, we've got these two sets of vertical and horizontal bars. First off, If we click on the horizontal bars, these are the list rules. For every criteria or condition and every rule, we will have a subtotal and a total of people who match that. If we have 4 or 5 rules and we want to see how many people match each subset of that rule, click on these horizontal bars and look at those numbers, because it kind of helps you decide, am I pulling the right number? Do these subsets actually equal what I think they will when I'm getting this final list result? So it's just a place to kind of proof and review. The other thing next to that is the columns list. And this is where we can turn on and off additional profile and other pieces of information. So you'll notice right away, we can show first name, middle name, last name, nickname, and then we can even see the campus that they attend. We can see gender, we can see age, we can see membership status, whatever is beneficial to what you're looking for. And you can even see when somebody was maybe added to this list. What date were they actually added if this is an ongoing list that keeps running? So lots of different things you can set here. When you click on this one, show list rules, you can hide it. So in this case, we'll just look across some of the columns that we've just turned on, and you can scroll left to right to see more if it doesn't all fit here. So in this case, those are how we actually add a better view into the data that we're looking at, or additional view. Now, we also have something over here, a little print icon, and this is actually a reporting area. If we click on the printer, you will see that we have the ability to print this list, but we can do that with a type of report function. Sometimes you might want to pull a birthday report, or sometimes you might want to pull an anniversary report. These are built-in reports. There's even Avery address label reports. So with that, we can generate a report. In this case, I'm just going to use the default report, and I'm going to show you what this looks like. Now we have 2 options. We have a PDF option and an HTML option. I always recommend just doing the HTML option first, proof your list or proof your report, and then come back and do it again and choose PDF, and then you can download it if that's something you want to do. So let's just do this real quick. We'll generate this HTML version, and as soon as it's done, it saw the little progress bar across the top. We get this default report link right here. When you click on that, you're going to get a different type of list layout, and it just has more information here, but the idea is that we could print this out if we wanted to. So this is the whole idea, print the report, and that's what we're seeing here. If we want to go back, we can go back, and this will still be here for future use. And then you could also change this by clicking on the printer icon once again. And I just want to point out, if you're really technical and you really want to get into building a new report that's a custom report, click on new report. I'm going to call this a test report. We can base it on another type of report. So in this case, I'm just going to use default report, and I'm going to create that report. You're going to see some HTML over here. And like I said, if you're a highly technical person who really wants to get in the weeds here and tweak your report, you can see a preview of those changes that you make anytime you want to edit some of this criteria over here. And that usually has to do with these different classes and different areas. Like I said, this isn't for everybody, but for those of you that want to get into the weeds a little bit, you have that option here. So that was found under the custom report section, and I'm going to back out here. And when you go there, you're clicking on the printer icon and you're generating this report. If you click on the printer icon and want to get to that custom area, you got to click on edit reports. Okay, enough about that. The next option is export CSV file. If you click on that, you have the ability to download a CSV file. You can download all profile data, which is a lot of information, or you can download only the current visible columns that you're viewing, which is probably more than likely what you're after. Next, you've got these bulk actions. We've seen these in the automations tab as well. They look exactly the same. We've got an app and we've got a function that happens inside those apps. And so in this case, we're looking at people, all kinds of different functions. So what we're saying is, rather than running an automation that runs in the background at night, we can run an action right now, right here on this list of people, and we can do it immediately. Now, I will caution you, I will say, anytime you're going to do something like this, you're changing something on their profiles. For example, if we wanted to set the membership type for all of the people on this list, and we wanted to change everybody to a visitor, we can perform that action, and all 27 people on this list will now be visitors because we've taken this bulk action or this action and we've told Planning Center people lists to do this. I will tell you, before you choose to run this, you should always ask somebody to proof it with you and say, does this sound right? Get somebody else's eyes on it. I've seen instances, and this can be a very powerful yet risky way of changing data. It's a great way to change a lot of profiles when you know exactly what you want to do, but it can't be used loosely. And I've actually seen where thousands of profiles were changed to a marital status of divorced, for example, and that was just an accident. And they all had to be changed manually and fixed. So I would say be careful when you use these bulk actions and make sure that you really think through what you'd like to change and know exactly what you're going to do. What action are you going to take? Have somebody look at that with you and proof it. So just keep that in mind. You can do lots of things within other apps as well. These are very powerful and very useful. Okay, next we have send messages. Okay, we can send an email here. We have 27 people on this list. When we click on that, we can immediately send an email from Planning Center. It's got these different options here that we can type in different information and format it. But there is one thing I want to show you, which are called placeholders, and that's found over here. And if you click on this, you'll see that we can add an auto tag here for the recipient's first name, and it shows up with these little brackets around it. So now we're personalizing this email and we're saying whoever's on this list, Aiden Silbernagel, Ariana Dennis, we could say, dear Aiden, dear Ariana, it's going to populate that information there. So maybe we put a comma in there, and then maybe we type out the body of our message, and that all goes here. And then at the end, we sign it sincerely, and now we want to sign it with another placeholder. And in this case, we might want to add the sender's full name. So we can add that as well. And it will populate for whoever's sending it. And if we want to create a template, we have the ability to additionally create different types of templates. And you can manage those templates by going to the bottom of this list and just clicking on Manage Templates and say New Template. And you're going to see something that looks very similar, still got the placeholders in it. And now you have the opportunity to actually create different types of templates that can be automated through actions or automations, or they can be just sent manually when you pull up a list and want to communicate with them. So that's email communications. And remember, you still have this send through MailChimp option, even when you're lower than 500. And maybe you want to take advantage of that because you just like the features in MailChimp. That's a lot more powerful platform, and maybe there's some things you'd like to do. So you're going to sync it through MailChimp. And when you do that, you do have some additional options on the actual person sending it, or the email address in which it's coming from, and the domain. So just remember that you do have some additional things you can do there. And ultimately, you can click send email and you'll just be emailing this list. Now, there's a few things to keep in mind with that. We also have send church center announcements. We can send an announcement to all the people that use our church center app, that have it downloaded on their phones, their mobile devices, and they will get a pop-up church center announcement. So if they have notifications enabled, they will get this notification because we're sending it through this option. The other thing is you can send text messages through this option as well. So we can send a text message to our mobile users' phones. Now that's something that does incur an additional cost, and it's something that I would encourage you to, once again, click on the question mark, type in texting, and get additional information. It's very affordable, it's very cheap, but you should definitely check the pricing on that because it is additional. Okay, now we've talked enough about what you're going to find on the results tab. Let's get into the rules themselves. I'm going to go back to lists and I'm going to go to new list. Okay, we're going to start off with adding a rule. As soon as we do, we have an option to include, or if we click on that, exclude our information here. And I'll show you how that's used on a couple examples. Next, we have this app selector. And in this dropdown, you're going to see the apps that you have permissions to view. And in this case, we're going to look at people. So we're going to stay with people, but we can use other ones in conjunction with people. So we'll start off with people. And then we have all of this criteria. People has the most criteria. It's our person's information, the profile information, and more. We can see household information, permissions. We can see when it was created. Again, when it comes to lists, you have to use them and you have to play with these things in order to get familiar with all these options. Now, if you don't find what you're looking for at first glance in this list, I guarantee you it's probably going to be found under personal. So if you don't see that criteria that you thought you would see for people, go down here to personal. But pay attention, we have some other things here, including additional custom tabs where we can look at information from one of those custom tabs and we can say, show me all the people that have growth track information with this date or between these dates, or baptism dates between a certain date and time. Just remember, we can look into that information as well as these workflow tabs. We can look at workflows and pull lists on workflows and say, show me the people that are on step 1 or step 2 of my workflow. So keep that in mind as well. But here we're going to click on personal. And again, if you don't see it in the main list, check personal, and you're going to see a whole bunch of more criteria here. And this is probably where you're going to find what you're looking for. A lot of times I like to use the age one. And sometimes we want to look at, between a certain age, but we can also say at least or at most or is. So there's lots of different ways we can utilize these criteria or these conditions. But in this case, we'll just look for people that are 0 to 12 years old. And so that's one condition. Now we can add additional items. We can say, and include some additional information. But what if I want to find additional personal information? Well, that's where I might use that duplicate option. And I can either duplicate the whole rule or I can duplicate just the condition. And in this case, I'm going to duplicate the condition. And instead of age, I might be looking for gender this time. So maybe in this case, I'm going to say, I want to find people who are age 0 to 12 and include people that are also males. So notice that it defaults to and. I want this and that. So both of these criteria have to be met to show up on this list. But I also have a drop down up here and I can change that to any. And what that changes this to is or. And so now I'm looking for this criteria or this criteria. Now, anybody who meets either of these will show up on my list. And there's one more, and it's none. And this is actually a neither. So that's this nor that. And we use that in conjunction with additional rules where we can say, I don't want this nor that, but I do want this. So there's all kinds of combinations that we can do here. We're going to stick to the all, which brings us back to the and. And we're also going to look at something here where maybe we want to add a rule. And we have the same functionality again. So now we have two sets of conditions for our first rule, and it's this and that. And then we have a secondary rule. And maybe in this rule, we want to look for people again, and maybe we want to look for something more specific, and maybe it's something to do with created. And we want to look at when it was created between a particular date. Maybe we want to know when it was created between 1/1/2023 and maybe today's date or something similar to that. And you're just looking for people from the first of the year till now who have been created. So we're looking for people, in this case, persons who are 0 to 12 years old and people that are males. And we're going to include people who have a profile that was created between 1/1/2023 and 9/15/2023. Now, it's really important here, and I'm going to move this little bubble over here with the camera icon in it and just show you that there's some additional criteria here. But before we look at that, we have to submit this list in order for this criteria to save. So in this case, I'm going to click submit. And I'm going to allow this list to run so I can save the criteria. Now, this list actually produced 8 results. And sometimes I want to be able to proof some of this information. And the way that I might proof that is to click on those bars, those vertical bars, and maybe turn on some criteria. In this case, I might want to look for gender and I might want to look for age because those are 2 of the criteria that I'm looking for. But remember, if I also want to see how many people meet those different rules, I can look at the subsets and say, 18 people were 0 to 12 and 58 people were male. In that case, when you look at both of them and say this and that, I had 8 people. And then we also have another rule, and we asked it to find people that were created between this date, and it was 123. And when we combine this and that, we end up with 8 actual matches. So that's how those work. This is how we show additional information, and this is the additional information that we can scroll through and just verify, does this list meet what I was looking for? And it looks like it does. So if we go back over to rules, there's a couple things I want you to remember. We can also say this or this rule. We could combine things. We can also say exclude. So we could actually look for this, but we might look for the opposite or the inverse. And in this case, we might exclude people that were created between this date and get a whole nother list of people because we want to see people who were created outside of this date range, and we're going to exclude that. You can do that with any of this criteria. We can exclude people who are males and only see not set and females if we want to. There's all kinds of possibilities and potential uses of each one of these functions. The other thing I want to make sure you're aware of is that we can also include exact matches, which is the default, but we have some additional criteria here, and that is primary contacts of matches. So in this case, we're looking for children. And many times with children, we're not looking to email the children or communicate with the children. We want to communicate with their parents. And in this case, maybe we want to communicate with the primary contact. So if we reran this list and click submit, we should hypothetically get the parents of those 8 children that we just pulled. And rather than seeing the actual children, we should have parents. Now, in this case, it looks like we don't have complete household information because we're not seeing the parents. But in most cases, that's how you're going to find those parents. Additionally, you have household adults of matches. You have household children of matches. You have all household members. So there's lots of different choices you can make here, but the default will always be exact matches. And you need to keep that in mind, especially when you're working with children. Now, it's only going to show us as a default active profiles. But if you want to look through the whole database, you might have to check this box and include inactive profiles. So something else that's worthy of keeping in mind in case you're just looking for active or you'd like to see how many people are inactive, which is another set of criteria you can use. Now, we looked at a very simple situation here. I'm going to delete this rule, and I'm going to delete this rule, and I'm going to start over and add a new rule. And this time I'm going to look for people that maybe are actually not in people that are in groups. And I want to look for people that are members of a group who maybe are in any active group, any group type. We might have different group types, but I'll just say any group. And then we have different groups. Well, I just want to see all the people that are in groups. So if I run this, I should see anybody who's a member of a group across all groups. Now, every time I do that, and now we have 29. Now, across that list set of criteria or rules, we get a title, and it's auto-generated, and our list is named based on the criteria that we've selected. I would highly suggest editing and just change this to something that makes sense. Like in this case, group members. And now if I save that, I'll know when I come back to this list or I share it with somebody else, what exactly was I looking for in this list. So always remember, you can change that name after the fact. And again, if you're syncing with MailChimp, maybe it's a good idea to change that name before you sync so that that can become a label over on the MailChimp side of things. So just worth keeping in mind. Now also, I can add another rule. So in this case, I might look for people who are in a group, and we saw that we had 29 people. But maybe I also want to see people who are in a group and people who are in services, and maybe they're on a team. And maybe they're just somebody who, maybe we want to see somebody who's got a team assignment, and it's any service type, any team, any position. But we can be very specific. We can drill into certain teams, certain positions. We can be very specific or very general. In this case, we're just looking for people in groups and people who might be serving. And it's really a way for us to look at engagement. So if we run this list, we could look for people, and there's just one here. It's Austin Anthony, and it looks like he meets both those criteria. So apparently, Austin is in services, and he's a member or leader of a group. So there's lots of different things we can do here. I highly recommend that you get in here and you look for different combinations of things. We can use registrations. We can look at a very specific registration, and we can look for named attendees for a particular event, a specific event, or maybe just an event that has a category, and we might have multiple events that are in this category. Or maybe, again, we're just looking for a registration between a specific time, and it could be across any registration, across any event. So there's lots of combinations. Check-ins. We can use check-ins, and we can look for people that have permissions, admin permissions, or we can look for attendances. And this is really handy when it comes to setting automations. So maybe we're looking for check-ins into a very specific class. In this case, we want to see that it was attended, and we want to see the event. And in this case, maybe it's a membership or growth track class. And again, this is important that we do check-ins, because check-ins are a trigger for ways to populate custom profile information. So custom tabs, custom fields. And in this instance, maybe somebody has attended a growth track class and we're looking for that. And when we pull that list of people, maybe we're going to use an automation on this list. And we're going to say anytime somebody checks into this event for baptism or this event for growth track class number 1, we want to update their profile, and we can create an automation that says when somebody is added to this list and checks in, we want to go to a people action and we want to update a field. And maybe in this case, it's, the growth track one that we talked about earlier. And we want to look at the start date and we want to update based on the date that this automation runs. And then we create the automation. And when this list runs, we now have this card representing what this function is. Now, I will give you a best practices tip here. When you create an automation, and this is something that's going to be running in the background, 2 things. Number 1, have a category for automations. And now that you're using an automation, go set that category to automation. Not only does it help people find it, but they know that this is one of your automations running in the background. So that's really important. Number 2, we've got to set it to refresh every night. So again, another setting we have to pay attention to here. And if it is campus specific, set that as well. But the thing to remember is rules will find the people. Automations will take action and update information potentially on their profile. And in this case, that's what we're looking for. We're looking to update a particular custom field, and that's what's explained here. Now, when you have an automation on a list, you do have these little 3 dots here, and you can see the history of how many times it's run and on whose profile it's run on, and you can also delete it here as well. There's one other thing to remember about automations with lists. We can pause them. They don't have to be running all the time. We click pause, we can stop that from running for a period of time, but we always have to come back and enable that automation if we want it to kick in and run again. It tells us, by the way, who created it and when it was run or updated and by who, exactly down at the bottom here. So keep that in mind as well. There's lots of power built into these automations. So again, this is lists. We could spend many, many more hours on lists, but I highly encourage you to get in here and build combinations of criteria to find people in your database and start to do things with those lists. I hope you find it helpful. I hope you get in there, really dig into lists and start to learn them.